All right, well, it's 9:01, at least Pacific time, so we'll assume folks are going to be prompt. We're only taking 30 minutes today, so we want to make the most of the time that we have. Thank you to everyone for joining us for this Gravity Legal webinar. I'm Dan Lear, Head of Marketing and Partnerships at Gravity Legal, and I'm joined by Tom Lenfestey, who is the Principal CEO and Big Chief at the Law Practice Exchange. Just a quick note about Gravity Legal. We are a payments and credit card processing platform aimed specifically at lawyers and law firms. We specialize in helping lawyers manage their trust account funds and generally bring a technologically savvy and kind of future forward look on the payments and money management platform or money management processes for lawyers. We're really pleased to have you with us today and excited to spend a few minutes talking about how you can improve the value of your law firm. And if you're so interested, even prepare to sell it. As I mentioned, I'm Dan Lear. I'm a licensed attorney in Washington State, but I now help run Gravity Legal, a division of Gravity Payments. And as I mentioned, I'm here with Tom Lenfestey, the head of the Law Practice Exchange. Tom, do you want to give folks a little bit of a background on you before we just dive right in?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Again, thanks, Dan, for setting this up, for having me. Excited to kind of share what we can in this, quick webinar format, answer questions otherwise. But again, Tom Lenfestey, an attorney, CPA, a practicing attorney in North Carolina, and that's our home base, even though we have a nationwide presence. I founded the Law Practice Exchange almost 10 years ago, about 8-9 years ago. And essentially, the Law Practice Exchange helps lawyers and law firms in buying, selling, and valuing their law firms. And we do that in creating continuation plans. Really, our goal is to see what has been built with one generation, move on to the next generation under a transferable value type concept. So building out those transition plans, making sure that whether it's personal value, firm value can really go on to the next generation. And if you're looking to retire, that you can benefit from it. Or if you're looking to grow your firm, that you can acquire and kind of have some of that growth through acquisition versus normal marketing business development.
Love it. That's great. Just quickly before we jump in, I wanted to just let folks know what our agenda is going to be. So you and I are going to chat a little bit, probably until about 20 after, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A. Folks, this is our first time on this webinar platform. So if I could just get one of you, hopefully one of you at least is paying attention, to just say hello in the Q&A so I can be sure that, that we're getting your questions. Brilliant. Thank you to Paul for doing that. Awesome. Saw that, Paul. So if you want to submit your questions as we talk, that's totally fine. We'll come back to them again at about 20 or 25 after and answer as many of them as we can. So thank you very much for doing that. And let's just dive right in. So Tom, and if folks missed this, I guess I'll just quickly give a plug to the content that you and I have worked on. So Tom and I did a podcast as part of our Gravity Legal, Financially Legal podcast about law practice valuation. And then we also created a law practice valuation calculator, which is perhaps the way that many of you found your way to this particular webinar and what Tom and I have been working on together. So shout out to both of those pieces of content if you haven't seen them. But Tom, one of the first questions that I wanted to ask, and again, this is something we chatted about a little bit on the webinar, I'm fairly familiar, again, as I mentioned, I'm a lawyer. I've got lawyers in the family. I spend all of my waking work life at least thinking about them. And I still feel like selling a law practice is not something that a lot of lawyers, maybe even particularly solo lawyers, think a lot about. And so why pitch me, give me the pitch or your kind of elevator pitch on why lawyers, even if you're just a solo lawyer sort of practicing to sustain yourself, why you should be thinking about, or even why it's possible or it's valuable to think about selling your law practice.
Yeah, and so I'll go into my pitch maybe a little bit, but kind of share that, that was one of the first maybe responses we got from attorneys, especially, solo practitioner, small firm attorneys is, it's just me, right? It's just me. I'm not sure that my firm is really worth anything. And when, kind of the explanation that I would have with those attorneys is, well, exactly, it's you. And that's part of the value that we would look at transferring to another. So you have connections, you have referral relationships, you have client relationships, that can transition to another. And that's part of what the sale of a law practice really is. It's a combination of, Dan, your value that you've built. I want to go into your LinkedIn connections, right? And to those that you know and do work with and that are good ambassadors for you, I want to go to your customers or your clients and really work on transitioning them, introducing them to a new relationship over time. So I always used to give kind of the explanation to lawyers who would really question if their firm had value. And I'd say, well, when's the last time you took a vacation, right? And, when you came back from that vacation, did you have a lot of missed calls, voicemails, emails you had to catch up on? Was there more work piled up when you got back, right? And I said, that's value, right? Those clients, whether they're on some reoccurring or anything else, but they've came to you, they've been referred to you. You have that. If you don't want to service them, somebody else does. And so if your timeline is, I want to retire, I want to slow down, before you start doing that, that is client work, client revenue that somebody else is really pushing hard to find. And you have it. It's been with your firm. It probably comes easier now in your, potentially later stages of your professional career as compared to the early. But there's a whole nother generation of law firms and attorneys really trying to grab onto clients and revenue growth and struggling to do so. So even if you have, 5 new clients a month that comes in and it's really kind of a scaled down practice, there's great transactional structures for you to kind of shift those over to somebody else so that they can benefit from that growth. But also, Dan, if you're the attorney, so can you. You can get a financial, you can monetize that, value that's transferred over. And the best part is the clients see the benefit. You just don't tell them, hey, I'm retiring, go somewhere else, right? You let them have a true continuation of service. So, every law firm has value. The question is how much of that is tied to you personally versus to your firm, entity business structure. But I would tell you, even if you have just that personal value, we can show you a great way to transfer that, to monetize it, and to make it a success for you, as well as for, the buyer, the next generation who gets to benefit from what you've built.
Love it. That's great. And of course, we will give people the opportunity to reach out to you and have you share some of your wisdom one-on-one. But I'd like to dive in on that very question because I think that's what folks show up for these things for, is to get some webinaring, or to these webinars is to get some insight and get some information. So if you were to sort of identify, let's call it 3 to 5 tips. I heard you begin to tease one of them out as this distinction between kind of the value that you inherently bring and the value that you're building in your firm. If you were to let's kind of peel that apart. If you were to identify a few different tips that you think lawyers or firms or law practices could implement in order to maximize value, and we can think about this solely from the perspective of, hey, I just want to grow my firm, right? I want to make it more valuable, but also from the perspective of making it more attractive to a buyer. What would those be? What are, I walk in off the street to you and I'm like, Tom, I never thought I'd think of this crazy practice sale opportunity, but I really want to start to think about it. What are the things that I should be, top of mind beginning to think about as I, hopefully contemplate a sale of my practice?
Yeah, great question. And, to kind of lead into it, we always get the, maybe the response or the question that, of course, additional revenues, right? Or, additional profits are the best. Yeah, money. The more you bring in, the more valuable your firm should be worth. And I can tell you that, yes, normally that is the case, but I can tell you that you can bring in a lot of dollars and not have maybe some of these other factors that we'll talk about, that really the dollars almost work against you. You have great dollars, but it's really tough to transfer those dollars to somebody else or to see them or to have them see the value in it. So revenues and profits, of course, are important. One of the first things I'd say is, of course, if you can build, and Dan, as you kind of already mentioned, a firm marketing structure, separate and apart from you or separate and apart from the other attorneys in your firm, but really try to build the firm marketing plan to where the firm is able to generate, clients and, new revenues on its own. And that kind of, as I already mentioned, kind of separates out, it's not the personal attorney value, it's more of the firm value itself. And that's kind of a key concept throughout building value in at least the marketplace for buying and selling. The more that you build for the firm, meaning the website, the systems, the marketing, everything else is directed at the firm versus the individual attorneys, the easier it is to transfer that value. And the more marketable you will be, to a buyer, the more valuable, the better payment terms, everything else. So first and foremost, what I'd say is, focus on a firm marketing plan versus an individual attorney plan. The next one I'd say is look to your employees as assets versus liabilities. And maybe I'll save kind of my biggest point to how to create value for selling your firm or whatnot to the end, but focusing on employees as assets versus liabilities. And what I mean by that is make them part of the team. A lot of law firms we see are definitely the pyramid structure, which means everything kind of comes from the attorney, goes down, maybe comes back up. As much as you can flatten that and really make it more of a business team approach and have, non-attorneys that have, defined roles, responsibilities. One, you're probably going to see your revenues grow and profits potentially grow. The other is if we're talking about removing you from that picture, then you still have this great employee team that can transfer with the next generation owner or manager or anything else. So focusing on employees as assets would be a key part. On the financial side, I was just sharing with you, Dan, that we had a conversation. Anytime you can take, customer transactions, and I know attorneys call their customers clients, but anytime you can take it from like a one-off transaction and truly turn that into, a relationship or a client reoccurring type of thing. So what we see a lot of good firms that have done is they have clients that are on monthly, quarterly, semi-annual billing, right? And they're going to link into, of course, have those clients pay fixed fees instead of, billing them and collecting on accounts receivable or anything else. But, let's take like an estate planning client, for example, of ours, may have, $100,000 a year in kind of committed reoccurring revenue. Right. So that's kind of a maintenance program they do to help maintain wills, trust, otherwise, those different things. Well, the benefit to us, or the benefit really to that client in anything, is that's predictability of revenue to the next potential owner. So that's definitely going to help us increase our payment terms, how much cash down otherwise, but also is going to go to a baseline for value. Right? There's no arguing, there shouldn't be any arguing that we have at least 100,000 a year, coming in to that firm, because those are set up with automatic credit card processing on the monthly billings, right? We can track those, we have those agreements with clients, and it provides a real solid foundation to lessen buyer risk and also promote seller value. Going along with that, and something, Dan, I know you guys are kind of, of course, near and dear to your heart as well, is eliminating as much accounts receivable and lagged billing as you can. We see great, whether it's litigation, even transactional, that have a tremendous amount of AR. But when we look at it, because a buyer's going to look at it the same way, we're probably going to discount anything that's over 90 days and eliminate it. Right? Because the buyer's just not going to be able to get behind something that's past 90, maybe 120, that it's good AR, unless you can point to, well, it's because it's this specific case that still has to go through this. But they get really cautious with paying with old AR. And Dan, I don't know if you guys have seen that too, but that's where, reoccurring monthly, kind of clean financials month to month is really important.
I love it. So firm marketing plan versus lawyer marketing plan. See people as assets. and then you're going to look for kind of smooth, recurring revenue for the firm. Those are at least the top three that you know kind of give someone as they were starting to think through this.
Yep. And I'll kind of end with, you know, the biggest advice I can give anybody to promote value in their firm. And it seems very simple, but for a small practitioner, or even somebody that's, you know, very active looking at building their firm to sell in 10 years is delegation. If you're the owner and you're the manager of your firm, you know, figure out every way that you can to delegate your responsibilities. And what that's going to do is hopefully challenge you to build systems within your firm, and then their business systems, right, that you can transfer on to somebody else. It's going to challenge you to train those employees on those systems to make those employees an asset. And then it's going to focus more and more on the firm as a system versus you. So attorneys have a hard time of letting go, right? It's kind of our nature. We're all kind of control, right?
Yeah.
But delegation is a great way to build value outside of yourself. And it makes it so much easier for us to paint the picture to a buyer on what you have as a business operation, and then also how easy it will be to kind of transition the seller, out and put the buyer in, because really even on legal, on client interactions, you've stepped back, from those, and those are done by others within the firm, based on systems, based on checklists, other different kind of key things. So it's a huge motivator to buyers. If you can show that you've got, systems, you've got trained people, and really you as the attorney are the manager or the key legal advisor, from a parent side versus you're in everything, right? And so I would say delegation. It's a simple concept, but you can wake up every morning and say, what am I going to delegate today? And what do I need to do? Build a system, put a checklist in place, train an employee to make sure that I can do that and still keep the firm running successfully.
Perfect. We've got like 2 minutes left before questions. But I was going to just point out a couple of things. First of all, for those who are interested in exploring recurring revenue situations and business models in their practices, we are launching shortly a series of blog posts. Actually, the first one went out yesterday on how to build a subscription legal services business in your law firm. We've had 2 interviews on the podcast with 2 folks who have done this, Jonathan Tobin and Kim Bennett. And then we've got the blog that which is the first in a series of posts about kind of how to build a subscription legal services business. So like for looking for that recurring revenue, that's one great way to get it. And then we'll be launching actually a technology that helps lawyers and law firms offer subscription legal services and get paid on a subscription basis on in a release that's, I think, dropping the end of this week. So coming very shortly. So wanted to give a quick shout out for that. The other quick thing I just wanted to talk about, Tom, on our podcast, we talked about a book called Built to Sell. And I put the word out on Twitter and people responded to that fairly warmly. It sounded like a few people had read it and really liked it. So for folks who are really kind of into this, that's a book that you recommended, right?
Correct. Yeah, I think it's a great, simple concept. It's well written by John Warlow, but a great book to get you started. And it covers some of the same principle of, if it's all about you, you don't have a business to sell, or that business isn't worth a lot. If you start delegating, building systems, focusing on certain things, you are increasing the value of your business. So it's a great read.
And then and I'm going to go out like way out. And Tom, maybe if you've read this book, you can comment one way or the other, or if there are folks out there who have read this book and like it one way or the other. I admittedly have not read this book, but I listened to 2 or 3 podcasts by someone I really trust, actually a former lawyer who's gone on to build marketing businesses. His name is Brian Clark. And he interviewed a woman named Elaine Pofeld, who wrote a book called The $1 Million One-Person Business. I thought it was really compelling. I'm a huge fan of Brian, and he's pretty thoughtful about business. So while I haven't read the book, I feel fairly confident that that's something that like they talk a ton about delegation and building systems and processes. So as you were talking, Tom, about delegation and processes, that's the one that like my brain was sort of lighting up with that one. So again, full disclosure, haven't read it, but I know a ton about it, and I know a ton about people who have recommended it. So I feel fairly comfortable saying, at the very least, read the back cover and see if it might be valuable for you. Folks, we have some time for questions now for Tom. So if you've got them, I think there's maybe one that's come in. Oh, that's a good question, although not necessarily for you, Tom, but I'll answer it quickly. And Tom, if you want to riff on it, you definitely can, because maybe you've seen some of these. Isn't subscription or monthly retainer dependent on type of practice? The short answer, Richard, is, and actually I would definitely recommend that you read our first blog post that we just posted yesterday, because we talk about this in some detail. On the one hand, you know, and again, as I've been writing this content and working with others on this front, we've joked like, you know, is a criminal law subscription practice something that can be done, or a personal injury one? And I think the jokes are relatively easily constructed, you know, divorce. But as I've begun to think about it, as I've begun to look into the different kinds of options, there is someone out there who's doing divorce by subscription, a couple of different folks actually. And I think it really just, and I know a fellow who helps folks in bankruptcy, and it's not necessarily a bankruptcy offering, but he offers a bunch of forms and a bunch of webinars and a bunch of other content that will help a consumer kind of navigate their way through a bankruptcy. So, and I tend to be more of the kind of creative, anything's possible type, but I really think that if you're in a practice area and there's a certain type of person you want to help, I wouldn't automatically foreclose the possibility that you could build a subscription type recurring business. But again, we want to hear from Tom. Tom, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. That's obviously something that I feel strongly about, but do you want to weigh in on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it caters to certain types of practice areas, transactional, right? You know,
Yep.
corporate, estate, those type of things. But I will say, I mean, I've run across, you know, immigration attorneys who run things on a subscription based, you know, for individual family clients, not just corporate clients otherwise. And I think you just have to think, you know, this is typically what I do, but is there a subscription service advisory platform add-on, right? For maybe a whole different window of clients that normally wouldn't hire me to do this type of work, but they would, you know,
Totally.
subscribe on an annual membership, something like that for, you know, self-help divorce, right? I think that's some of the new innovations that some attorneys and otherwise are coming out with is, you know, those procedures that really attorneys are either pricing themselves out of the game, right? Or, you know, other alternative providers are doing that for us. And so can you create something that's, you know, advisory in nature, subscription-based billing, you know, per month for a 12-month contract, something of that nature. So you may have to just add kind of a new service or a new kind of niche focus to your practice area. But I've seen them across the board, even for litigators. I haven't seen them for criminal defense yet, but I'm sure I will, because everybody likes to be creative and come up with that piece that they can offer.
Love it. Okay, we've got another one for you here. And while you're answering, there've been some questions both to provide the calculator and also to provide links to these podcasts and this content. So I'm going to be kind of busily doing that while you answer this next question, Tom. So Tom, in your experience, have you seen solo or small firms with strong inbound marketing, for example, evergreen content, local SEO, et cetera, leverage this inbound marketing to sell their practices?
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of, you know, the first point I hit on was a strong firm marketing plan. So if you've got a great website, you know, you have different marketing, you know, strength that are tied to the firm name, to the assets that are held by the firm. You know, we sell law firms all the time and transact those that are, you know, a referral based to that individual. So it's a solo practitioner, you know, they were members of the Rotary Club, Chamber of Commerce, right? You know, all these different things, and they built up a good network of clients, referral sources. We can sell those. The payment terms on those are going to be, you know, a little bit more to the risk adverse buyer. First, if you have something that is there generating opportunities, through website, through marketing campaigns, SEO, Google Ads, Facebook, you've figured out those different things, then definitely, right? Because that stands alone, and we really look at it and we would sell it to any buyer of, that's an asset that transfers very quickly, right? And so if you're getting so many leads in per day or anything else, that's a key metric, right? Typically, the number one question that a buyer asks us is, as they're starting to explore, they're going to say, well, where does this firm's clients come from? And if you can point to, again, those sources being, well, here's our Google Analytics, here's the number of leads that we get from these different sources that has nothing to do with you, the attorney, or your attorneys within your firm, then that's only going to help, promote value, but also complete a successful deal. So if I didn't hit that home enough, yes, that's exactly where you'd want to try to spend, some dollars and build that out to make sure that that value's there. So hopefully that helps from that standpoint.
Yep,
I think Dan is busy trying to get the podcast linked up.
Yeah, I've got one more to go, so I'm almost there. Just give me 1 second, folks. Here we go.
One of the things too, I just wanted to touch base on, everybody asks about, valuation, firms to drive value. But one of the key elements that I would say is, payment terms has an impact on how we price firms, right? And so, promote value, right? You'll come up with a specific, price, everything else from that. But how to achieve that price or to maximize that price can sometimes be greatly impacted by the payment terms that you would be seeking a buyer to pay, or that a buyer is willing to do that. And what I mean by that is, in our marketplace, buying and selling law firms, most buyers are going to look for, for the most part, risk adverse structures. We'll call those earnouts, right? Paying percentage of revenues over time. Most deals we do are a blend of down payment and some, kind of performance piece. But again, if you are a seller and you want all of your cash at closing, you need to have a really strong, valuable firm for a buyer in the marketplace to go and cut you a check for whatever that amount is, or it's going to be a reduction, right? You're going to get actually less value, less of a price based on payment structure as compared to, staying on board, willing to transition, willing to kind of take some of the risk on the seller side that things will be successful to that point. So I just mentioned that because value in itself, we'll value and come up with that, but payment terms do have a direct impact of how much you can push that value, up here versus you're going to have to accept a little bit lower price because your payment terms are a little bit different than what most of the market wants to see.
Love it. That's great, Tom. And I actually meant to mute, but not take myself off of camera. So sorry to leave you hanging there, but I was with you the whole time. Folks, we have 1 more minute if anyone has a final question for Tom. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of pitch him one more softball as we sort of close things out. Actually, you know what? We'll just go ahead and wrap up. This will be recorded, so we'll send you a link to the recording. It'll be posted on the Gravity Legal YouTube channel, so you'll be able to see that. But I just wanted to actually end by saying we'll send you a bunch of resources. I know folks had questions about the calculator, the podcast, the blog posts I mentioned. We'll send all of those out to you. You can follow us by, well, actually, let's start with Tom. Tom, how can folks get a hold of you if they want to learn more, if they either want some consulting or they're thinking about selling their practices? How can they track you down? How can they learn more?
Sure. thelawpracticeexchange.com. That's THE, lawpracticeexchange.com. You can find me, you can find Amanda, kind of our key sales and client manager there, but also you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, all the socials that we can keep up with. But from that standpoint is, yeah, we'd love to connect. Feel free to shoot me an email at tom@thelawpracticeexchange.com or give us a call. Our local Raleigh number, 919-789-1931. But we'd be happy to have a confidential conversation. Even if it's something you're thinking about 5 years down the road, we'd be happy to be a resource, help you do that.
Love it. Yeah, and we're connected now on LinkedIn, and it's so fascinating. I see a regular cascade of firms that you are in the business of selling or trying to sell or helping get placed. I would have never known that this marketplace is that active. So it's super cool. I really like tracking what you're up to.
Definitely. Thanks.
Sure. Folks, if you want to keep up with Financially Legal, you can do that at gravity-legal.com/financially legal. That's where we post all of our podcasts and blog posts and other content. You can catch me at dlear@gravity-legal.com or follow me on Twitter at rightbrainlaw. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We'll hit you with the follow-up email with all of the resources that we talked about, as well as a link to this video once it's published. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.
Thanks, Dan.